In this module, we're going to discuss measures and the importance of validity and reliability. So validity is often used when describing measures like as tests, questionnaires, assessments. So when you're going through and you're reading your research articles and they talk about the different measures that they used in order to assess a construct, they're often referring to validity and then also reliability, which we'll talk about shortly. So a measure is considered valid when it's designed to measure and actually does measure what it's reported to perform. So if it, say you're attempting to measure depression, if the measure is accurately measuring depression, then it's considered to be valid. And we'll talk about different ways that we assess validity to determine whether or not a survey or questionnaire or assessment tool is actually measuring what it's supposed to. So come up with a concept, anxiety, depression. And so then we determine, are the questions being asked actually asking what it is that we're trying to measure? So it's important when you're considering different measures for your research, because the more valid a measure is, the more valid your results will be. So for some research projects, when you're designing them, when you think of an idea or something that you want to assess, like social media use or impact of cyberbullying, the question is, how are you going to measure that? And what assessment tools are you going to use? And are they valid and reliable? Because that's really where you take the idea and the theory of the research and put it into practice, because you need to have some sort of assessment tool to be able to capture a phenomenon that's happening. That's how you look at your independent and dependent variables. You have to have some way of assessing them. And so when you're deciding how it is that you're going to assess them, we look to validity. And so we look to say, is this assessment tool actually measuring what it says it's going to measure? And where you'll find most conversations about validity is usually in the methods section of research. So when you're reading different articles, look to the methods section to find out any information about the validity of the tool. So there's different types of validity. So broken up into different buckets. So judgment validity consists of assessments that are based on professional knowledge. One way of looking at this, as you could say, is it common sense? Does it seem to be asking questions that are related to the topic? So we look to the content. We say, okay, so we're looking at the content of this measure, and is it asking appropriate things? Is it making sense that this is something that may measure anxiety? So is it asking questions that are related to anxiety? So if you were to have a series of questions related to, say, depression or anxiety, or if you've ever seen one of those assessments, they're all within the realm of questions that you would ask that are related to depression. And so let's say you were designing another depression inventory, and while you were in there, you threw in something like, what is your opinion of social media? Well, at face value, the content of a question like that, well, how is that used to be related to depression? You're just trying to look at depression. Well, I was just asking about social media use, have anything to do with determining, yes, are you depressed or not? It would be a jump. And what we would find that when you went to run some statistical analyses on it, that question might interfere with the results of it being valid. So when you're looking at an assessment and you're looking at the different questions, do the questions make sense? Right? Are they covering everything that they want to cover? Or is there something that's missing? Another example of this in a much simpler sense is even just in the exam at the end of the class. And so if I'm asking a series of questions and I'm trying to determine how much you've learned over the course and how much information that you've retained, then it makes sense that I would ask questions of material that we've covered in the course. If I started asking questions outside of what we covered in the course, then it really would not be appropriate for that content, because what I'm trying to do, the purpose of the assessment is to say, have you picked up and absorbed the material taught in class? Therefore, taking something and putting those outside the class and asking it to you does not actually fit in that way to be appropriate. And it's not aiming, it doesn't help for what I'm trying to aim, which is what we covered in the course room. So face validity, this appears really just as it says, is it valid at the face of it, right? Does the test appear to be measuring what it claims to be? This is the least sophisticated measure of validity. A lot of the time, mainly because it just seems really obvious. So if you're trying to assess for suicidal ideation, then asking somebody, have you ever thought of killing yourself? Really, that makes sense, okay? If you ask somebody, have you thought of killing yourself? It's clearly, it makes sense that that would be an example of something that might be suicidal ideation. Asking if you were trying to do assess for a level of happiness or job satisfaction, actually asking, are you satisfied at your job? These are the obvious questions. And so, yes, it appears just at face value. Okay, you're asking if somebody likes their job or not. Are you satisfied with your job? Yes or no? That's going to give you the result of a level of job satisfaction. So it's the least sophisticated measure of validity. It's in most sense, what we refer to as common sense is the question actually directly asking what you're trying to assess. So instead of giving somebody a depression inventory, it would just be saying, are you depressed? Rather than asking all the questions that for some of the statistically valid and reliable depression inventories, ask a series of different questions, like how many times a day or how often a week do you feel sad? So they ask questions that go around the topic, whereas face validity, they just directly ask. Now, empirical validity, so this is often referred to as statistical validity. And the main reason for that is because unlike something like face validity or content validity, you're actually using more of a statistical analysis to determine the validity. So you may involve a statistician. You may look for something called a validity coefficient. You may do a Cronbach's alpha. So in this course, we're not getting deep into statistics, but in a statistics course, you would learn the different analyses that you might use to determine validity. So in many of the assessment tools that have been done, they've gone through this rigorous testing and analysis. And so if you ever look for an article that is about the way that somebody created an assessment, you'll see all of the different ways that they went through to determine empirical validity and what statistical analyses they use to determine that. So predictive validity, this is the degree to which a test accurately predicts something that may occur in the future. So if, let's say, you were looking at an assessment, it assesses computer use, and to what degree does this look for a low academic performance? Or to what degree does the ability to use a computer predict job success? And you may find predictive validity a lot of times in some of the applied research or human resources research, in looking at, so even the SATs are looking to be able to predict somebody's success in college. So the theory behind the SATs is that they're taking a test that will somehow predict your scores on your test will predict your success and your aptitude in college or graduate school or whatever test that you may be taking to apply. But the basis is that this test will somehow predict a future occurrence. So that's what we're looking at when we say predictive validity, is being able to say if this test is given to somebody, will it be able to predict future performance? So we use a lot in applied organizational psychology because attempting to determine, say, at an interview, if somebody is given a personality assessment or a job performance assessment, does that predict the way that they're going to be able to perform at their job? And then concurrent and criterion validity. So this takes an assessment and compares it to another assessment. They measure the same or a similar construct. So for example, there's a number of different IQ tests out there, or a number of different depression inventories. And so it's you may create a list of questions. So again, let's say you're measuring depression. So you may create a list of different questions and then compare that to a depression inventory, like the Beck depression inventory, or to be able to look and compare it with something that currently exists and see if there's overlap. Right? So a new personality test may be compared to say something that's outdated and older. So maybe something like Myers-Briggs or a different type of personality test. So We take something that we know has validity, possibly reliability, and we take the new assessment and compare it to that and through a series of statistical analyses. But so when referring to concurrent or criterion, it's looking at an assessment that already exists and comparing it to a new construct or a new assessment to see if there is some similarity there. Is the new depression inventory also measuring depression? Is it capturing the same or similar results as a previous depression inventory, but maybe in an updated way? Because some of the assessment tools that are out there are outdated. So we want to perform against something that already exists to see. Sometimes a lot of times happens is you'll see an updated or a newer version. So a certain amount of assessment, say there's like, for example, a burnout assessment. Well, all right, so they do a burnout assessment and then they, over the years, they say, all right, let's see if we can try and improve it. And so they add different questions and then take the results, the analyses from that and compare it to the previous version. So it's taking one assessment and comparing it to another to see if they're measuring the same or a similar construct. And so construct validity, now you're really combining everything together. And so you're using a series of different methods and approaches that are combined. And so you're doing factor analyses, correlational methods, a lot of statistics here, which is why it's empirical. So you're looking at this set of concepts, right, and the way that they relate together. And so you're developing the measure and you're empirically testing these possible relationships. So again, when you're designing your own research and you think about what sort of measures that you want to use, you want to look for validity and you want to look to see what type of validity was used. Construct validity is often the strongest because it requires a lot of empirical tested methods. So, for example, you may write a questionnaire and you can use that questionnaire, but you also want to take a look at the different theories, the different concepts, maybe perform a Cronbach's alpha on it, and look to see, does this new assessment, is this series of questions that you're asking, have they been rigorously analyzed using statistics, looking at correlations to be able to define perhaps a new construct or to capture something new? So this is especially interesting in the field of cyber psychology because right now there's not a lot of assessment tools out there. So as pioneers in this field, you may find yourself creating new tools or looking at new tools and trying to determine, are you creating a new construct? Are you creating a new item that could be measured? And so now you're creating the first tool to be able to measure a certain phenomenon. Back when I was doing my dissertation, I was measuring employee engagement, and there were not a lot of assessment tools out there that had gone through the validity and reliability tools to be able to really use dissertation level research. So that was definitely threw a wrench in my research planning because the only things that were available had not gone through the rigorous analysis required. And I probably could have just completely redone my dissertation just to create a assessment tool for employee engagement at the time. This was many years ago, more than I care to remember, but so there are times when you want to create a new measure to create a new construct. And so for that, you would be looking at construct validity. So now we get into reliability, which is the other part of what's important about a measure or assessment. You want to always be looking at validity and reliability. So validity isn't measuring what it says it's going to measure, and then reliability of, does it produce consistent results? Is it reliable? Does it consistently yield similar results? And so there's different types of reliability and ways to assess it. So there's internal, and so there's different ways that you can take a look at how the way that a test is reliable. So the split half method, so you take the different questions asked, you split them into half, and then you look to see if all the questions are equally assessing what it is that you want to assess. So each question, is it reliable getting the similar result? And then you're looking at the external validity. So to what extent does the measure vary from one user to another? So a very popular way of determining reliability is test retest. So you're measuring the stability of the test over time and over again and say, okay, so does this hold up? Does this hold up over time? As you continue to use the test, are you getting similar results? So if you give the test to 100 people and you get a certain amount of a certain type of feedback and you get certain results, and then you give it to another group of 100 people, and then another group of 100 people, are you getting similar results? And so if you think, to tap into statistics for a moment, think about that normal curve. Where are your results happening? Are you getting a lot of outliers? Are you falling within the normal distribution? And so the more that you test and retest, the more you're going to see patterns in the way that the reliability is affected from one use to another. And then there's inter-rater reliability. So that's would be that different raters still give consistent estimates of the same behavior. So if you're taking your depression inventory and first you try it on, say, males 30 to 45, and then you try it on females age 30 to 45, and then seniors, and then just a different age groups. And so you're trying this assessment on different populations to determine how reliable it is across different populations and different raters. So the different types of reliability, want to always make sure that your measures are reliable, that they are consistently measuring what it is that they say they will measure over time, over different use, over different populations. So again, validity, does it measure what it says it's going to measure? And reliability, does it measure what it says it's going to measure consistently? So again, together, these are two of the most important things when you're designing your study, because if you're not using a good assessment tool, if you're not using a good measure, it can invalidate your entire study. So you always want to be looking at assessment tools that have been commonly used or that have been through rigorous reliability and validity testing. So just knowing that it's the extent to which, so reliability, how consistent are the outcomes when the experiment is repeated more than once, and validity is the extent the instrument is measuring exactly what we want it to measure. And keep repeating that. So those are kind of the things to take away from here. Validity, is it measuring what it says it's going to measure? Reliability, is it measuring what it says it's going to measure more than once, repeatedly? And what you may find when you're doing research, you're doing these analyses. So if you look at target A, all right, we want to, of course, hit the bullseye. So we're finding a poor validity. It's not hitting the bullseye, but it's reliably not hitting the bullseye. So you're not measuring what you say you want to measure, but it's not measuring it across a lot of different populations. So that doesn't work. Target B, you're just all over the place. You're not measuring what you say you want to measure. It's not measuring consistently. Target B is just all over the place. It's not working. Target C, you are in the bullseye, and you're in the bullseye consistently. You've got good validity. You're measuring what you want to measure. You're hitting that bullseye, and you're hitting that bullseye multiple times. So target C is what we want to go for. So you need to have both reliability and validity. So bottom line, when designing your research, select a measure that is both reliable and valid. And if you want to design your own assessment tool, you have to perform numerous statistical analysis to ensure that the measure is reliable and valid. And that failure to select that valid and reliable measure can invalidate your entire research study. So as you work on your final research project, as you think about the different research projects that you want to do, always make sure that you're looking at the measures that you want to use, that you're using measures that have been proven use in previous studies. So you look when you're doing the literature review at other areas where these assessment tools have been used. You want to discuss in your methodology section how reliable they are, how valid they are, when they've been used. And if you do decide that you want to design your own assessment tool, how are you going to prove the validity and the reliability of it? So it won't be as effective if you say, I'm just going to create a questionnaire and ask some questions. You can do that, but you want to make sure that you're running the assessments and the statistical analyses that are required to make sure that you can say, we created this tool, here's the assessments that we ran, here's the analyses that we ran to be able to prove that it is both reliable and valid. So again, if you have any questions, definitely feel free to email me. And otherwise, I will talk to you soon. Thank you.